Between 1959 and 1963, hundreds of babies across Britain were being born severely damaged by thalidomide.
The thalidomide tragedy set a powerful precedent for people's right to safe and effective drugs, forcing governments to take greater responsibility for public health by establishing stricter oversight, mandatory rigorous clinical trials, and extensive approval processes to prevent future medical disasters. The 20th century marked a revolution in medicine. As new drugs emerged, so did the need for safety testing. In 1937, the U.S. pharmaceutical company S.E. Massengill released elixir sulfanilamide, a drug mixed with a toxic solvent, diethylene glycol. This drug caused more than 100 deaths, primarily in children. The public outcry led to the passage of the 1938 Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which required pharmaceutical companies to conduct animal testing before drug approval. At the time, it was widely believed that animal testing was a definitive measure of safety, and the drugs deemed safe in animals would also be safe for humans. Additionally, drugs were often marketed and prescribed based on limited data with no legal requirements for companies to monitor long-term effects or even track prescriptions.
In 1953, the Swiss pharmaceutical company Ciba first developed thalidomide, a drug intended to treat respiratory infections. However, in 1956, Chemie Grunenthal, a German pharmaceutical company, was the one that ultimately acquired and introduced it to the market. Thalidomide was promoted as a safe and non-addictive sedative, an alternative to barbiturates, which was highly popular for its hypnotic and sleep-inducing effects. Animal tests failed to establish a lethal dose, leading to the belief that the drug was harmless to humans.
In 1958, the drug expanded beyond Germany, reaching the United Kingdom under the name Distaval. By 1960, it was available in 46 countries under at least 37 different brand names. Its widespread use was fueled by aggressive marketing with a major selling point: safety, even for pregnant women. Without requiring a prescription in many countries, thalidomide was easily accessible and quickly became a household staple. However, in the U.S., the FDA blocked its full approval, as Dr. Francis Kelsey determined there was insufficient evidence to prove its safety.
It turns out that even one thalidomide tablet, one tablet, is one too many.
Despite this, some doctors gained access to the drug and prescribed it to patients, unknowingly exposing them to its devastating effects.
At the time, medical science did not fully understand how drugs cross the placental barrier or their potential impact on a developing fetus. There were no regulations restricting pregnant women from taking newly developed medications, nor were there requirements for clinical trials on expectant mothers before drug approval. Without thorough evidence, thalidomide was widely prescribed for morning sickness, reinforcing the false belief that it was completely safe for both mother and child. This misconception resulted in devastating consequences, ultimately driving the creation of new laws to protect consumer safety and ensure stricter drug regulations.
On December 25, 1956, an employee at Chemie Grunenthal welcomed a newborn into the world. However, this child was born with severe limb malformations. It was the first documented case of a thalidomide-affected baby. Over the following years, reports of infants with missing or shortened limbs became increasingly common. Yet, because of their trust in animal testing and lack of prescription documentation, doctors did not suspect a pharmaceutical cause.
And I think one of the issues with thalidomide in particular is that they were only required to do rats.
By 1960, a growing number of physicians worldwide were encountering babies with severe birth defects. But without an obvious cause, the medical community struggled to make the connection. The range of deformities affecting limbs, organs, and nervous systems varied widely, making identification even more difficult. In 1961, Australian obstetrician Dr. William McBride began noticing a disturbing trend. Many of the mothers giving birth to affected infants had taken the same medication during pregnancy, thalidomide. His letter to The Lancet raised alarm worldwide. People questioned if a widely prescribed drug could be responsible for this increase in birth defects.
As doctors began questioning thalidomide's safety, a darker truth emerged. Pharmaceutical companies had received warning signs months before the drug was withdrawn, yet they chose to remain silent. Documents later revealed that Distillers, the UK distributor of thalidomide, was aware of potential birth defects linked to the drug as early as June of 1961. However, they continued marketing it until December, resulting in 1,000 more disabilities and another 1,000 infant deaths.
As the truth came to light, public outrage spread like wildfire. Parents of affected children demanded accountability. politicians faced mounting pressure to tighten drug regulations. In the United States, where thalidomide was blocked from full approval, President John F. Kennedy praised the agency's vigilance, but called for even stronger drug safety measures.
Every doctor, every hospital, every nurse have been notified. Every woman in this country, I think, must be aware that it's most important that they check their medicine cabinet and that they do not take this drug, that they turn it in.
The world was watching, and reforms were inevitable.
On November 26, 1961, Chemie Grunenthal formally withdrew thalidomide from the German market. Other distributors, including those in the UK and Australia, followed suit in early December. However, in some homes, the drug remained, kept in medicine cabinets unaware of the dangers it posed.
In 1968, Chemie Grunenthal executives stood trial in Germany, facing charges of criminal negligence and bodily harm. The case lasted more than 2 years, making it one of the most highly publicized pharmaceutical trials of the era. But in the end, no one was convicted.
They had the trials, but they couldn't get definitive evidence to say, hey, this guy covered up that and this person covered up that. Even though the trials took place, they didn't really get very far.
Grunenthal executives settled out of court, agreeing to compensate German victims while denying direct responsibility.
In the United Kingdom, the 1968 Medicines Act required all drugs to meet strict safety, quality, and efficacy standards before market approval.
In Germany, the drug law of 1976 introduced mandatory pre-market drug testing, stricter clinical trial regulations, and government oversight, shifting from industry-led testing to state-controlled approval.
Globally, the tragedy led to the formation of Good Clinical Practice, or GCP guidelines, setting international ethical and scientific standards for clinical trials, ensuring human subject safety and regulatory harmonization across countries.
In the U.S., the Kefauver-Harris Amendments of 1962 mandated proof of both safety and efficacy before FDA approval, introducing phased clinical trials and stricter monitoring for adverse effects. This new legislation led to a comprehensive review of all drugs approved between 1938 and 1962, resulting in the removal of approximately 600 medications deemed ineffective from the market.
They also made a stricter drug approval process. They made sure that there was something called informed consent in place so that patients who are taking the drugs, especially when a drug is in development and it hasn't been approved yet, they're informed of all the potential risks.
In 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld these reforms, allowing the FDA to regulate entire drug classes. The 1997 FDA Modernization Act further strengthened oversight of drug approvals, medicine devices, and health claims.
Patient safety, we really start from the very beginning and keep going to the end.
I think the FDA got it. Patient safety is first and efficacy is second.
These reforms ensured stricter oversight, mandatory rigorous clinical trials, and extensive approval processes, preventing future medical disasters and reinforcing the fundamental right to safe pharmaceuticals.
In 2022, the FDA Modernization Act 2.0 was passed, eliminating the requirement for animal testing before human trials. This was seen as a step toward innovation while maintaining rigorous safety standards.
We use a lot of animals in research. What we find in animals doesn't always translate to people.
By embracing new technologies such as organ-on-a-chip models and AI-based simulations, the FDA aims to expedite the drug approval process without compromising safety, reflecting an evolving understanding of scientific progress and ethical considerations.
Despite its dark past, thalidomide remains in use today. In carefully controlled settings, it has been repurposed to treat leprosy and multiple myeloma, offering hope to patients suffering from these conditions.
In Brazil, over 100 children have been born with deformities identical to those seen in the 1960s. Experts confirm a direct correlation between the distribution of thalidomide tablets and the increasing number of affected newborns.
It's a very fine line that I walk, and many of us walk, when we think about thalidomide in today's world. Clearly, you can see what it has done to the thousands of us who are still on this earth. But if it provides some kind of assistance, help, relief of suffering, then I cannot, in good conscience, be opposed.
This highlights that, despite the reforms prompted by thalidomide, stronger drug regulations must be implemented internationally.
The thalidomide crisis exposed the failures of drug regulation, but it also led to progress. However, gaps in international oversight remain. Stronger global laws are needed to prevent future tragedies. The thalidomide tragedy set a powerful precedent for people's right to safe and effective drugs, forcing governments to take greater responsibility for public health. Stricter government oversight, mandatory rigorous clinical trials, and extensive approval processes were established to prevent future medical disasters.